Joining me now in the Cipher Brief studio is former senior CIA officer Daryl Blocker. Daryl, it's so nice to have you here. You spent a lot of your career focused on what's happening in Africa. So I'm really interested to get your opinion on this latest news that these M23 rebels have now moved into and taken over the city of Goma in Rwanda. It's a city of about 2 million people. Goma or Rwanda are not often in the headlines. Why is what's happening there so important?
What's happening there is really important right now because of what happened in the mid 90s. So if you can just bear with me for a moment, that entire region, I don't think people have a concept of how large it is. So if you were to take Ohio and draw a line down to Alabama, everything east of that, so about one quarter of the United States, continental United States, is the size of this one country. If you take the corridor where this is going on, Goma, all the way down to Katanga, down towards the Mozambique border, that's roughly Maine to Florida. So when people are looking at this, I need them to kind of understand the scope and scale of what they're dealing with. So Rwanda, in and of itself, became a part of, most African countries gained their independence between 1959 and 1961. Rwanda was no different. It was part of what was known as the German East Africa. German East Africa dates back to the late 19th century. It switched over to German control uh, after 1917, after World War One, and then of course after World War Two, that came up to the points where most of the colonizing countries, Portugal, France, Germany, um, of course the British, were all letting go of their prize states and on the African continent. Anyway, just kind of put that in perspective. So M23 in and of itself has only been around for about 10 or 11 years, but it really goes back to the start of the ruling party who now controls Rwanda, and that's President Kagame. President Kagame was the right hand man, the intelligence director for Yoweri Museveni, the president of Uganda. They had a falling out, of course, and now the student has kind of usurped the master in that sense. So there's tension, of course, between those two countries. The Tutsis, who are the minority in Rwanda. So when the Germans first did a census in 1933, it was roughly 14% Tutsi and 85% Hutu. So what they did, which is what most of the colonizers did, is they put the minority in charge of the majority. So the Tutsis were able to rule for a long time, of course, until independence, when the numbers just weren't able to sustain, continued being under control of a 15, 14% minority. Of course, the ethnic tensions, the assertion that the Hutu extremists, that these Tutsis really came in from somewhere else, the Hamitic theory, that roughly they came in from the Horn of Africa. And if you look at the Tutsis, very tall, angular, look very much like the people of Eritrea and Ethiopia today, just in physical appearance. So that belief that these guys were outsiders, and the fact that the Catholic Church really didn't help at all because they allowed that type of thought that these are outsiders. It's okay to refer to them as cockroaches. It's okay to refer to them as vermin. It's okay to refer to them as people who not even people, subhuman. So when the most vile of the genocide between the Hutus and the Tutsis happened, April of 1994, plane carrying the president of Rwanda and the president of Tanzania, because negotiations were going on, were killed in a plane crash. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, that sparked a reaction that led to an average of 11,500 people per day
Yeah.
being killed for about a 2 month period. That is 5 times what the extermination rate was in the extermination camps during World War II.
It's
So
horrific.
it's horrific. The United States And it's, the United States has since come in and recognized that their refusal to accept that genocide was happening, their refusal to step in when they could. They were still smarting a little bit from the Mogadishu and having to pull out of Somalia. It was only about a year and a half, 2.5 years, and at the same time, there was already killing going on, but not on the scale of what we saw over a 100-day period, where more than 1 million people lost their lives. Estimates are as low as 800,000, but the numbers are certainly in the millions. And then the displaced people in that region are the folks who are still being replaced or being displaced today.
Yeah, Daryl, I think that's a really important level set that you just gave us and some deep context. And of course, there are movies and books written about the genocide and the horrors that
Mm-hmm.
were happening there. Fast forwarding now to 2025, what
Mm-hmm.
does M23 want there? I mean, talk to me a little bit about the minerals. Is it ethnic identity? Like, what are their goals?
Their goals are the stated goals are much along the lines of the Sudetenland back in World War I, World War II. Our peoples are being mistreated by folks in other countries. We are going to speak for all Tutsis, whether they live in the Eastern Congo, whether they live in Rwanda, whether they live in Kigali, or whether they live in Uganda or wherever they happen to live. We are going to be their umbrella. At the end of the day, it's really about money. If you look at Zaire, the Democratic Republic of Congo, I'm sorry, it was Zaire when I joined the agency, and in my head, it's still Zaire. They are the most resource rich country on the planet, bar none. 65 to 70% of all cobalt in the entire planet is on that region in which the M23 is fighting. Now, that's significant because, of course, cobalt is used in renewable energy. They're used in everything that we require for defense purposes. For us to have this chat, over the wire, the laptops, you name it, cobalt is important. Magnesium, gold, diamonds, you name it. They are just one of the most resource countries in the world, which is why it's important. And which is why it's important that you don't allow this group of rebels who are inflicting atrocities as we speak, who are using rape as a method, a tool of
Weapon.
war.
Yeah.
Um, we can't allow M23 and the people behind them to be a part of this. Now, I spent 3.5 months on the ground in Bujumbura, Burundi, in the aftermath of the Hutu Tutsi massacres. I've been around a lot of really tough places, but the hatred, if you don't think you can smell hatred, you can absolutely smell it. It is a real visceral thing.
Yeah.
And it was tough. It was tough being there because I didn't know the area. I was coming in from West Africa. I went in because we didn't have a CIA presence in that particular embassy, and we felt it was important enough for us to go out and shore up some of the other places that were being impacted by the internally displaced people, by the refugees who were flooding away from dozens of rebel groups that were later incorporated into the Congolese military. And if I'm not mistaken, the folks who now form M23 were a part of a 2009 agreement. They were a part of some other agreements where they were being fully integrated into the Congolese military. The
Is it
Uganda,
fair?
go
Is it
ahead.
fair, Daryl? Is it fair to ask or to say that there's, because of the resource rich country that this is, that there's a lot of international interest in this area, that it's not just the locals and it's not just M23?
Absolutely, I guarantee you, the every Western power out there is vying for it, and the Russians and the Chinese for that same mineral resource rich. The United Nations has had an assistance presence there all the way from, I believe, the mid 70s up till to right now. I believe that there are currently 47 different countries who have either invested or said that they're going to provide troops, personnel, nurses. It might be one or two there, it might be hundreds. But 47 different countries, Africa, Asia, Europe, you name it, they are there. So yes, but an assistance is different. Peacekeeping
Yeah.
and peace enforcement are not the same things. So their rules of engagement have been suspect. They've had their people killed. I would imagine that there are people who are part of the UN mission right now who are also being attacked and who are also fighting for their lives in Goma. Yeah, it's really really bad, and for the world to be sitting by like we did in 1994, that is the great fear
Yeah.
of what could happen, and very very quickly.
The future of national security is here. Introducing the Cypher Briefs NatSec Edge Conference, June 5th through 6th, 2025 in Austin, Texas. Join leaders from intelligence, defense, private industry, and investment as they explore the innovations shaping tomorrow's world. Gain critical insights, connect with top minds, and shape the future of security in an interconnected world. Don't just witness the future, be a part of it. Secure your spot now at natsecedge.com.
So we talked about the history. We talked about what's happening now. What do you think the risks are of a wider regional war breaking out over this?
I think the regional war never really stopped. The Great Lakes program, in the aftermath of that from 94 for about the next decade, was the CIA's largest foreign intelligence producing machine in the entire network. I only know that because I was a station chief in East Africa, and ultimately it was my program. Although our partners in Kigali, in Kinshasa, and the others contributed to it, it was mainly run out of a separate East African station. We had local reporters from those particular countries that were coming back for reporting. We had DIA officers who, as a way of giving them, some on the ground experience working with liaison, working with CIA, were reporting. So we had an entire network of sources on the ground, some of them in these rebel groups, some of them in the governments, that were all reporting back. So in the mid 2000s, when I was there, it was 10 years after the fact. We ultimately dismantled that program. The collaboration and the cooperation between the CIA and those services still exist to this day, but is not as robust as it was then. But we know the players, we know the history, and getting back in there and getting ginned up fairly quickly should not be a problem. I would imagine that the African Mission Center is working very closely with AFRICOM to try and figure out, a way forward. So I know there are people on the ground who are working this,
Mhm.
but we need to understand that it'd be like you being in Mobile, Alabama and trying to control some rebels running around in Augusta, Maine,
Mhm.
and having real authority. Even Mobutu, who is the strong man of Zaire, never really controlled anywhere from Katanga, which is down in the southeast border, all the way up to Kivu. In fact, there was a time where he landed in Kivu and literally was run from the airport back to Kinshasa, and he never visited again in his entire probably 2 decades as the president and the prime minister and the leader for life for Zaire. So we can't look at that part of the country being as compliant and under the control as the government seat in its capital. It's not the same as it is here. It's very different.
We're continuing to watch the headlines and to see what happens now that M23 is pushed into Goma, and there have been threats back and forth that means this might spread. We really appreciate the opportunity to hear from you, kind of a short history of the region that really helps put this into context and a lot of those other key issues that you brought up with the minerals, the international involvement there, and we'll continue to watch the headlines and see where this goes. Darrell Blocker, former senior CIA officer, thanks so much for taking time to spend with us here at the Cyber Brief today.
Thank you for having me.